Conditioning is the world's next big threat. By Chris Bryant. The vast majority of Americans have air conditioning, but in Germany almost nobody does. At least not yet. So when temperatures in Berlin rose to an uncomfortable 37 Celsius this week, a record for the month of June, I was uncommonly delighted to go to the Bloomberg office, where it's artificially and blissfully cool. By letting people in overheated climates concentrate on their work and get a good night's sleep, air conditioning has played a big part in driving global prosperity and happiness over the past few decades, and that revolution has still barely begun. About half of Chinese households have this modern tool, but of the 1.6 billion people living in India and Indonesia, only 88 million have access to air conditioning at home, Bloomberg New Energy Finance noted in a recent report. For many, relief is in sight. Because of the combination of population growth, rising incomes, falling equipment prices and urbanization, the number of air conditioning units installed globally is set to jump from about 1.6 billion today to 5.6 billion by the middle of the century, according to the International Energy Agency. Carbon dioxide emissions rose another 2% in 2018, the fastest pace in 7 years. That increase was alarming in its own right, given what we know about the unfolding climate emergency. But the proximate cause was especially troubling. Extreme weather led to more demand for air conditioning and heating in 2018, BP plc explained in its annual review of energy sector. It's not too hard to imagine a vicious cycle in which more hot weather begets ever more demand for air conditioning and thus even more need for power. That in turn means more emissions and even hotter temperatures. That feedback loop exists at a local level too. Air conditioning units funnel heat outside, exacerbating the so-called urban heat island effect, which makes cities warmer than the countryside. BEI expects electricity demand from residential and commercial air conditioning to increase by more than 140% by 2050, an increase that's comparable to adding the European Union's entire electricity consumption. Air conditioning will represent 12.7% of electricity demand by the middle of the century, compared to almost 9% now, it thinks. Thankfully, much of that extra requirement will be met by solar power. The need for cooling is highest during daylight hours. But because temperatures don't always return to comfortable levels when the sun goes down, there's a danger that some of the additional electricity will be supplied by fossil power. Buildings have long been a blind spot in climate discussions, even though they account for about 1/5 of global energy consumption. The inefficiency of air conditioning systems or badly designed homes and offices simply aren't as eye-catching as electric cars and making people feel ashamed about flying. At least Germany's Passivhaus movement, a way of building homes that require very little heating or cooling, shows some people are starting to recognize the peril. There are lessons to be learned from the world of lighting too. The LED revolution was spurred by innovation but also by better energy efficiency labeling on products and the discontinuing of out-of-date technology. Something similar needs to happen with air conditioning. There was a big step forward in January when the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol came into force. Although not well known, its aim is to phase out the use of potent greenhouse gases called hydrofluorocarbons, which are used widely in air conditioning systems. Unless substituted, these alone could cause 0.4 C of additional warming by the end of the century. Yet true to form, President Donald Trump's administration hasn't yet submitted Kigali to the Senate for ratification, even though American manufacturers would benefit from demand for the new technologies that it would spawn. Trump knows all about the importance of good air con. He spends much of his time at his Palm Beach Country Club, a place that couldn't exist without it. So he'd do well to remember this. You can air condition the 19th hole but not the golf course. And it's starting to get awfully hot outside.
Next article.
Cafe Coffee Day founder Siddharth seeks Rs 810 case valuation from Coca-Cola for his coffee chain. Bengaluru. Cafe Coffee Day founder VG Siddharth is seeking a valuation of between 8,000 crore and 10,000 crore from Coca-Cola for the coffee chain he set up over 2 decades ago, according to people directly aware of the development, while also aiming to retain a controlling stake in the business. The US beverages maker is in talks with Siddharth for a slice of equity in the coffee retailing business headquartered in Bengaluru, as reported by Eaton Thursday. The promoters are asking for a valuation of between 4 to 5 times of sales in the coffee business, on the back of some valuation trends in the industry both companies are privy to, said a source in the know of the matter. The group's coffee business expects to close the year ending March 2020 with sales of about 2,250 crore, according to a senior company executive. The business, which includes some exports of the bean, had revenue of 1,777 crore and 1,814 crore in fiscal year 2018 and 2019, respectively, according to regulatory filings. CCD, set up in August 1996, has grown to include 1,750 stores across India with 60,000 vending machines. It also has outlets across Europe as well as in Malaysia, Nepal, and Egypt. Siddharth was not reachable for a comment. Coca-Cola India, in an email response said, "This news is absolutely speculative in nature and as a matter of company policy, we do not have any comments to offer at this point in time." Experts are of the view that for Coca-Cola, an investment in CCD means access to retail outlets nationally. CCD is the only pan-India coffee retail chain. The rest have not been able to scale to its level, said Siddharth Khemka, head retail research, Motilal Oswal Financial Services Limited. While Starbucks is doing good, it doesn't have so many outlets, Khemka said. This also would fit with the strategy of Coca-Cola to diversify into other products considering that there is growing awareness against sugary and carbonated drinks, he said. As one of the country's largest individual coffee planters, Siddharth heads a coffee plantation group with over 20,000 acres and is bullish on coffee consumption trends in India, said one of the people cited above. The group expects India to emerge as the third largest coffee market after the US and China in 20 years. Brand consultant Harish Bijur reckons the Indian cafe segment will triple in the next decade even by a conservative estimate going by the way the country is getting to be outdoor consumption oriented, he said. There is social ostracism in cola category, and that would be why Coke is looking for a footprint in the staple beverages market, he added. However, the country is facing a drop in production of quality Arabica beans that has fallen from 120,000 tons 5 years ago to 95,000 tons in 2019, according to official data. Siddharth, an early investor in mid-tier IT services firm Mindtree, sold the 20.4% stake held by him and his associates to L&T at 980 rupees per share, earlier this year. With inputs from Raghu Krishnan in Bengaluru.
Next article.
India likely to pay for Russian arms in euros to beat US sanctions. New Delhi. India is likely to make its payments for Russian arms in euros to a Russia-nominated bank to bypass the threat of US sanctions for purchase of military hardware including the S-400 air defense missile system, people familiar with the details told ET. While certain payments for existing defense transactions have been processed through the rupee-ruble route, the people said that a solution was firmed up this month with Russia's VTB Bank agreeing to receive money in euros. Over $4 billion worth of payments to Russia have bunched up for this financial year, with the biggest contract being the S-400 system, followed by the Chakra-3 submarine lease and the procurement of 4 frigates for the Indian Navy. Besides, 2 additional Russian contracts are expected this year for the supply of AK-203 rifles to the armed forces that will be manufactured in Amethi and the inking of an army contract to procure Ka-226 helicopters that will be produced by a HAL Russian Helicopters JV. Sources told ET that VTB Bank is open to using a European account for the money transfer. The Indian bank selected for the transaction will have the least exposure to US currency. VTB Bank has processed large deals in India in the past few years, including the over $12 billion investment into the Essar Group that bailed it from bankruptcy. As first reported by ET, while the Indian government has been clear that it will not move away from purchasing arms from Russia, the threat of US action under the controversial Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, (CAATSA), had scared away financial institutions from processing transactions. In April 2018, the State Bank of India put a stop to all payments after Russia's flagship arms trading company Rosaboronexport came under sanctions by the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, blocking over $2 billion that had to be transferred. While India found an alternate route for payments by using banks with minimal exposure to the U.S., the issue took over a year to resolve as Russian financial institutions too refused to be party to transactions that would threaten their global business. Last year, alternative payment routes were found to transfer money for critical spares and repairs, including work on the INS Chakra nuclear-powered submarine that had suffered an accident, but a permanent route to send large amounts had remained elusive. Despite the repeated threat of US sanctions, India has made it clear that it will not back off from the S-400 deal with Russian manufacturer Almaz-Antey that has been in Washington crosshairs for long. At the same time, India negotiated several defense deals with the US, including the purchase of air defense missiles for the national capital, armed drones and naval aircraft.
Next article.
ITR filing. Tax Department will pre-fill your salary, FD interest, TDS details in ITR-1. To make the tax filing process easier for individuals, this year the Tax Department will be providing ITR-1 pre-filled with your salary, FD interest income and TDS details. Earlier, these details were required to be manually entered by individual in the form. These details will be pre-filled in ITR-1 only for forms filed online. The software will use your PAN to pick these details from Form 26 as the TDS return filed by your employer and your last year's ITR. These fields are editable and you will be able to correct the figures auto-filled in case of any mismatch. However, do remember that this facility is available for those only tax filers who are eligible to file ITR-1 and choose to file it on the e-filing website www.incometaxand.ie-filing.gov.in. If you choose to file your ITR-1 using Excel or Java utility, then you will have to manually fill in these details. Abhishek Soni, CEO, Tax2Win.in, a tax filing website says, as per the latest updates of the income tax website, if you are a salaried person and filing ITR using the website, then certain details will be pre-filled from the last year ITR data, 26 as and from Form 24Q. Details like salary income, deductions details, bank details, TDS details etc. will be pre-filled. However, the taxpayer needs to check all the details before submitting his/her ITR. Even if the details are pre-filled, the taxpayer needs to ensure that all the details are as per the Law of Income Tax Act and those columns where the filer has entered the manual information are filled correctly. Any submissions of incorrect details may invite income tax notices in future. This year the Tax Department has revised the format for Form 16 and Form 24Q, TDS return filed by employer. In addition to that, the format in which salary details are required to be filled in ITR-1 this year is the same as the format in Form 16. Therefore, while filing ITR this year, taxpayers are just required to copy the details from Form 16 and paste it on the ITR-1 form. Screenshot from Income Tax e-filing website on June 27, 2019. Further, the Tax Department has asked employers to issue the Part B of Form 16 to their employees by downloading it from the Traces website. Earlier, only Part A of Form 16 was to be downloaded from the Traces website. Part B of Form 16 was issued by employers using a third-party software. Therefore, The format for the same varied for employees. Sony adds, if TEEDS is not deducted from your salary income, then the employer is not mandatorily required to issue you Form 16. However, if your employer has submitted your income details to the tax department by filing Form 24Q, then your salary income details will be auto-populated, or else you might have to enter salary details manually. Chartered accountant Naveen Vadhava, DISM, Taxman.com says, with a view to cross-check the amount of deductions or exemption claimed by an employee in his return of income with those declared in the TEEDS return filed by his employer, the Income Tax Department has made a series of changes in Form 24Q, Form 16 and ITRs. As per revised Form 24Q, an employer is required to furnish the complete breakup of salary income of its employees and, correspondingly, the employee is also required to report the complete breakup of salary income in their ITR. As fields in TEEDS return and income tax return have been made similar, it was expected that the e-filing website will bring a functionality to auto-populate the breakup of salary in ITR forms from TEEDS return. Apart from salary details, deductions claimed by you under Sections 80C to 80U of the Income Tax Act will also be pre-filled in ITR 1. However, remember, only those deductions will be pre-filled that have been declared by you to your employer and for which you have also submitted proofs. In case if you have forgotten to claim a deduction from your employer, then that deduction will have to be claimed separately by manually entering the specific details. In addition to salary income and deduction details, ITR 1 will also have pre-filled information on type of house property from your previous ITR, details of income from house property from Form 26 as interest income from fixed deposits will also be pre-filled from Form 26 as interest received by you on the income tax refund of the previous year, if any, will be automatically pre-filled. Vaibhav Sankala, Managing Director, H&R Block India says, the Indian Income Tax Department has been at the forefront of implementation of digital governance. The e-filing was launched nearly 10 years ago, and today over 99% of the returns are e-filed. Introduction of pre-filled returns is yet another milestone. Pre-filled returns would help many salaried taxpayers in filing their returns more confidently and more easily. However, taxpayers should also note that with any new system there could be some teething problems. Taxpayers should particularly double-check all pre-filled numbers with those in the Form 16 and 26 as in cases where they see large refunds or additional tax payable in the pre-filled tax returns.
Next article.
Boeing's 737 MAX software outsourced to 620 rupees an hour engineers. By Peter Robison. It remains the mystery at the heart of Boeing Company's 737 MAX crisis, how a company renowned for meticulous design made seemingly basic software mistakes leading to a pair of deadly crashes. Longtime Boeing engineers say the effort was complicated by a push to outsource work to lower-paid contractors. The MAX software, plagued by issues that could keep the planes grounded months longer after U.S. regulators this week revealed a new flaw, was developed at a time Boeing was laying off experienced engineers and pressing suppliers to cut costs. Increasingly, the iconic American plane maker and its subcontractors have relied on temporary workers making as little as $9 an hour to develop and test software, often from countries lacking a deep background in aerospace, notably India. In offices across from Seattle's Boeing field, recent college graduates employed by the Indian software developer HCL Technologies Limited occupied several rows of desks, said Mark Rabin, a former Boeing software engineer who worked in a flight test group that supported the MAX. The coders from HCL were typically designing to specifications set by Boeing. Still, it was controversial because it was far less efficient than Boeing engineers just writing the code, Rabin said. Frequently, he recalled, it took many rounds going back and forth because the code was not done correctly. Boeing's cultivation of Indian companies appeared to pay other dividends. In recent years, It has won several orders for Indian military and commercial aircraft, such as a $22 billion one in January 2017 to supply SpiceJet Limited. That order included 100 737 MAX 8 jets and represented Boeing's largest order ever from an Indian airline, a coup in a country dominated by Airbus. Based on resumes posted on social media, HCL engineers helped develop and test the MAX's flight display software, while employees from another Indian company, Cyient Limited, handle software for flight test equipment. In one post, an HCL employee summarized his duties with a reference to the now infamous model, which started flight tests in January 2016, provided quick workaround to resolve production issue which resulted in not delaying flight test of 737 MAX. Delay in each flight test will cost very big amount for Boeing. Boeing said the company did not rely on engineers from HCL and Cyient for the maneuvering characteristics augmentation system, which has been linked to the Lion Air crash last October and the Ethiopian Airlines disaster in March. The Chicago-based plane maker also said it didn't rely on either firm for another software issue disclosed after the crashes, a cockpit warning light that wasn't working for most buyers. Boeing has many decades of experience working with suppliers/partners around the world, a company spokesman said. Our primary focus is on always ensuring that our products and services are safe, of the highest quality and comply with all applicable regulations. In a statement, HCL said it has a strong and long-standing business relationship with the Boeing company, and we take pride in the work we do for all our customers. However, HCL does not comment on specific work we do for our customers. HCL is not associated with any ongoing issues with 737 MAX. Recent simulator tests by the Federal Aviation Administration suggest the software issues on Boeing's best-selling model run deeper. The company's shares fell this week after the regulator found a further problem with a computer chip that experienced a lag in emergency response when it was overwhelmed with data. Engineers who worked on the MAX, which Boeing began developing 8 years ago to match a rival Airbus SE plane, have complained of pressure from managers to limit changes that might introduce extra time or cost. Boeing was doing all kinds of things, everything you can imagine, to reduce cost, including moving work from Puget Sound, because we'd become very expensive here, said Rick Ludke, a former Boeing flight controls engineer laid off in 2017. All that's very understandable if you think of it from a business perspective. Slowly over time it appears that's eroded the ability for Puget Sound designers to design. Rabin, the former software engineer, recalled one manager saying at an all-hands meeting that Boeing didn't need senior engineers because its products were mature. I was shocked that in a room full of a couple hundred mostly senior engineers we were being told that we weren't needed, said Rabin, who was laid off in 2015. The typical jetliner has millions of parts and millions of lines of code, and Boeing has long turned over large portions of the work to suppliers who follow its detailed design blueprints. Starting with the 787 Dreamliner, launched in 2004, it sought to increase profits by instead providing high-level specifications and then asking suppliers to design more parts themselves. The thinking was they're the experts, you see, and they will take care of all of this stuff for us, said Frank McCormick, a former Boeing flight controls software engineer who later worked as a consultant to regulators and manufacturers. This was just nonsense. Sales are another reason to send the work overseas. In exchange for an $11 billion order in 2005 from Air India, Boeing promised to invest $1.7 billion in Indian companies. That was a boon for HCL and other software developers from India, such as Cyient, whose engineers were widely used in computer services industries but not yet prominent in aerospace. Rockwell Collins, which makes cockpit electronics, had been among the first aerospace companies to source significant work in India in 2000, when HCL began testing software there for the Cedar Rapids, Iowa-based company. By 2010, HCL employed more than 400 people at design, development and verification centers for Rockwell Collins in Chennai and Bangalore. That same year, Boeing opened what it called a Center of Excellence with HCL in Chennai, saying the companies would partner to create software critical for flight test. In 2011, Boeing named Cyient, then known as Infotech, to a list of its suppliers of the year for design, stress analysis and software engineering on the 787 and the 747-8 at another center in Hyderabad. The Boeing rival also relies in part on offshore engineers. In addition to supporting sales, the plane makers say global design teams add efficiency as they work around the clock. But outsourcing has long been a sore point for some Boeing engineers, who, in addition to fearing job losses, say it has led to communications issues and mistakes. Boeing has also expanded a design center in Moscow. At a meeting with a chief 787 engineer in 2008, one staffer complained about sending drawings back to a team in Russia 18 times before they understood that the smoke detectors needed to be connected to the electrical system, said Cynthia Cole, a former Boeing engineer who headed the engineers union from 2006 to 2010. Engineering started becoming a commodity, said Vance Hildeman, who co-founded a company called TakeSci that supplied aerospace contract engineers and began losing work to overseas competitors in the early 2000s. US-based avionics companies in particular moved aggressively, shifting more than 30% of their software engineering offshore versus 10% for European-based firms in recent years, said Hildeman, an avionics safety consultant with 3 decades of experience whose recent clients include most of the major Boeing suppliers. With a strong dollar, a big part of the attraction was price. Engineers in India made around $5 an hour. It's now $9 or $10, compared with $35 to $40 for those in the US on an H-1B visa, he said. But he'd tell clients the cheaper hourly wage equated to more like $80 because of the need for supervision, and he said his firm won back some business to fix mistakes. HCL, once known as Hindustan Computers, was founded in 1976 by billionaire Shiv Nadar and now has more than $8.6 billion in annual sales. With 18,000 employees in the US and 15,000 in Europe, HCL is a global company and has deep expertise in computing, said Sukamal Banerjee, a vice president. It has won business from Boeing on that basis, not on price, he said. We came from a strong R&D background. Still, for the 787, HCL gave Boeing a remarkable price, free, according to Sam Swaron, an associate vice president who pitched HCL's services at a San Diego conference sponsored by Avionics International magazine in June. He said the company took no upfront payments on the 787 and only started collecting payments based on sales years later, an innovative business model he offered to extend to others in the industry. The 787 entered service 3 years late and billions of dollars over budget in 2011, in part because of confusion introduced by the outsourcing strategy. Under Dennis Muhlenberg, a longtime Boeing engineer who became chief executive in 2015, the company has said that it planned to bring more work back in-house for its newest planes. The MAX became Boeing's top seller soon after it was offered in 2011. But for ambitious engineers, it was something of a backwater, said Peter Lemmy, who designed the 767's automated flight controls and is now a consultant. The MAX was an update of a 50-year-old design, and the changes needed to be limited enough that Boeing could produce the new planes like cookie cutters, with few changes for either the assembly line or airlines. As an engineer, that's not the greatest job, he said. Rockwell Collins, now a unit of United Technologies Corporation, won the MAX contract for cockpit displays, and it has relied in part on HCL engineers in India, Iowa and the Seattle area. A United Technologies spokeswoman didn't respond to a request for comment. Contract engineers from Cyient helped test flight test equipment. Charles Lovejoy, a former flight test instrumentation design engineer at the company, said engineers in the US would review drawings done overnight in India every morning at 7:30 a.m. We did have our challenges with the India team, he said. They met the requirements, per se, but you could do it better. Multiple investigations, including a Justice Department criminal probe, are trying to unravel how and when critical decisions were made about the Maxis software. During the crashes of Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines planes that killed 346 people, investigators suspect the Maxis system pushed the planes into uncontrollable dives because of bad data from a single sensor. That design violated basic principles of redundancy for generations of Boeing engineers, and the company apparently never tested to see how the software would respond, Lemmy said. It was a stunning fail, he said. A lot of people should have thought of this problem, not one person, and asked about it. Boeing also has disclosed that it learned soon after MAX deliveries began in 2017 that a warning light that might have alerted crews to the issue with the sensor wasn't installed correctly in the flight display software. A Boeing statement in May, explaining why the company didn't inform regulators at the time, said engineers had determined it wasn't a safety issue. Senior company leadership, the statement added, was not involved in the review.